Normally we try to. Oh, that's a good thing. Yeah, Remco's already recording. An online lecture, because normally we try to organize this on site here in Amsterdam, but now we are in order to have Cara with us from the United States, from Albany. So, and as you can see, we are speaking English tonight as well, so everybody can understand. This lecture will be recorded, as you already heard. There was a small signal. So this lecture will be on YouTube. Afterwards, we will try to post it on our YouTube channel, so we can look at back, or people who could not be here tonight, they have the opportunity to see it online as well. As well, we are a week later than normally, because normally we're in the first Wednesday of the month. Now we're in the second. This is because of the availability of the speakers, but we're very happy that Cara, Marinus, and Mathijs are with us here tonight. So we have quite a nice program. Before we start, a few practical things which are important for all the guests, and it will be for myself as well, to shut down, turn off your microphone during the presentations, so there will be no annoying noise from backgrounds. As well, you can use the chat function if you have questions during the presentations. We will have after every presentation we have a short Q&A, so we can use your questions, and feel free to share your thoughts and experiences and questions. We're not in a big group, and just pretend we're all together in the same room. So that makes it more interactive as well. I think that's nice for the speakers and for us to have kind of a small conversation. I told about the recordings. Well, today we'll elaborate on the practice of urban heritage conservation, as you could see in the invitation, and specifically we will focus on the real-life case in Albany, in New York State, which is the Van Ostrande Radcliffe House, one of the oldest buildings in Albany, and a great and rarely preserved example of Dutch colonial architecture in the United States. The question is, how do you deal with such historic and vulnerable buildings in a dynamic urban landscape? And what is the meaning of Dutch colonial architecture in the United States and in the Netherlands nowadays? Maybe there is a different perspective to it as well, and it could be interesting. For that, we have Marinus van Dintel with us. He is our first speaker, and Marinus is expert in agricultural heritage at the Cultural Heritage Agency in the Netherlands. And as well, he is a PhD researcher on Dutch colonial farmhouses in New Netherlands. And Marinus will introduce us to the history, topology, and I think also as well the meaning of this particular architectural heritage. If I'm right, Marinus. And after your presentation, we have a short Q&A. So I would invite you to share your presentation with us.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Can you all see the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all.
Just kick off. Thanks, Mathijs, for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to talk about Dutch architecture in northeastern North America. And good afternoon, all of our participants in the USA, and also good evening to the participants in the Netherlands. My name is Marinus van Dintel, and I'm working as a specialist in agricultural heritage for the Cultural Heritage Agency in Amersfoort, as Maurits already mentioned. In the summer of 1994, I graduated with thesis of Dutch-Swedish relations in New Netherlands. And subsequently, my interest in the New Netherlands never disappeared. So 25 years later, I decided to pick up this thread and started working on a doctoral thesis on Dutch colonial farmhouses in New Netherlands. Like in the late 1990s, I was again in Albany in 2018 and 2019. And believe it or not, I just mentioned to Cara, but I missed the Van Ostrande Radcliffe House. It's kind of weird. Possibly I was a bit too much because my Dutch colonial farmhouses in an urban environment. but I still feel a bit ashamed. And I find it, in a way, a pity I didn't meet up with all these great people taking care of the oldest building in Albany. And I must say it's quite amazing to read and hear about all the work already done, and also the progress being made. So I just would say, like, just keep up the good work. In my presentation, I would like to guide you through some subjects. First, what the Dutch architecture in sorry for that. Oh. There we go. In Dutch architecture in the time of the Van Ostrander Radcliffe House. Secondly, the Dutch architectural features in the Netherlands, both interior and exterior. Third, like from the Dutch colonial. There we go. Sorry for the interruption. From the Dutch colonial to the Dutch colonial revival architecture in the late 1880s. And at the end of my presentation, I will come to some conclusions. Like after the English takeover of New Netherlands in 1664, Beverwijk, which was renamed Albany by the English after the takeover, remained a Dutch stronghold well into the 18th century. Around the time the Van Ostrander Radcliffe House was built in 1728, most of the standing buildings in the city were built in a recognizable Dutch style. This in spite of more than a half a century of British rule. Swedish traveler and botanist Peter Kahn, in Swedish Per Kahn, was visiting the city, Albany, in 1748, so only 20 years after the Van Ostrander Radcliffe House was built. And he made clear a very detailed observations of the people and the houses in Albany. So what he mentioned was like about the Albany population, which was about like 2,000 or 3,000 people in the 1740s. He wrote like the inhabitants of Albany and its environs are almost all Dutchmen. They speak Dutch, they have Dutch preachers, and divine services performed in that language. The manners are likewise quite Dutch, only their dress is, however, like that of the English. And specifically about the architecture, about the buildings, he wrote like, the houses in this town are very neat. They are partly built of stones covered with shingles of white pine. Some are slated with tiles from Holland. Most are built in the old Frankish way, with the gable and towards the street, except for a few, which were recently built in modern style. So that was mid-18th century, and it was clear that most standing houses in Albany still were in the Dutch colonial style. We know this information because he wrote a journal during his stay in the US and in Canada between 1748 and 1751, and it was published in Stockholm for the first time in the 1750s, and later translated into like English, Dutch, and German. The most new buildings were also built in the old colonial style. Here to the left, the upper left corner, you see the Dutch Reformed Church, which was built in 1715. And to the right, the top right, you see the Johannes Beekman Verheiden House, built in brick in 1725. So as you can see, it's still in the old Dutch colonial style. the upper left corner, you see the church. It's a whole church, and it's covered by a steep hipped roof and crowned by a cupola or a bell turret. And in the bottom left corner, I show you an example of one of these Dutch churches. It's late medieval, but it has about the same style of architecture. To the right, you see the Johannes Beekman House. It is a drawing by James Yates in the early 19th century. It's a rectangular building and unusually large, in fact, and having the front office the front entrance in the long facade, while in general the main entrance is in the gable end. So, like most of these dwellings, the characteristic feature is the Flemish facade. It is a drawing for this building. We call it Vlaamse gevel in Dutch, which can be translated into like Flemish facade, having two stepped gables, which are also called brick dormers in English. And in the bottom corner, you'll see an example in Amsterdam for this Flemish facade. In spite of the Beekman van der Heide house, the majority of the dwellings were gable fronted, as I mentioned, and still can be seen also paintings and drawings from around 1800. And here you see an example, an engraving from the Columbia magazine from 1989, showing you a row of Dutch-style houses in Albany, all gable fronted. Later on, I will tell you some more about like the architectural features of this kind of Dutch colonial houses. Unlike Per Kalm, which I just mentioned, the British had a kind of great aversion to the urban design and the architecture of the Dutch. They started around like the mid 18th century, that they started to be like very negative about Dutch architecture in especially the cities of Albany and New York. They thought the Dutch houses in these cities, they were frightful, they were old-fashioned, very clumsy. And in the opinion of American minister and author Timothy Dwight, they had exceedingly improved these cities after the old Dutch houses had been destroyed by fire or being pulled down and replaced by new ones and built in the new modern style, the more English manner. In the eye of the many British, the Dutch were being as trading competitors, very rude, very selfish and clumsy. Just to name a few character traits of the Dutch. And in this cartoon, you can see how the British looked upon like the Dutch. And here it says like the Dutch steamers on the frozen Zuider Sea. The Dutch were smoking pipes quite a lot. They were like to the British, they thought they were very rude, very clumsy. So you can tell many of these characteristics are shown in this cartoon of the early 1800s. As I already mentioned by the travel journals of Timothy Dwight, many Dutch houses got lost in the big cities, actually having the last one demolished at the end of the 19th century. On this slide, you see 4 examples of Dutch colonial homes in Albany, in the city of Albany, that were demolished. at the late 1880s or the early 1890s. In the upper left corner, you see the Staatshaus, which was from like 1667 or even earlier, and it got demolished in 1887. The 1616s Sturtevant House, Widow Sturtevant House, a stepped gable one, got demolished in the 1880s. I mean, another good example, and there are some good pictures of this house, the 1710 Lansing Pemberton House that got demolished 1892. And one of the latest ones, actually, one of these old ones that got demolished in the 20th century was the Van Slingeland House, which was also about the age of like the Avenue, the building. As Per Kalm, the Swedish traveler, already observed, also life on the countryside had a Dutch flavor. The Van Bergen overmantel painting, the middle part of that one you see at the middle picture at the bottom, shows you the Martin Van Bergen farmstead in Leeds in Greene County. And this one was, this farmhouse was dating from the 1730s, and it clearly indicates the Dutch style of architecture of the farmhouse, and also from the outbuildings, if you see the whole overmantel piece. Not only the farmhouse, as you can see over here, but also the Dutch barn and the outbuildings are depicted, and among others also the owners and their servants and their cattle, horses, the whole farmstead is shown over here. It's quite interesting to see. For almost 15 years I was living in Zeeland on the island of Walcheren, and in the southwestern part of the Netherlands. And the other pictures of the farmhouses over here are from this island. So you can tell there are some similarities in architectural style, and especially of these brick farmhouses in the upper Hudson Valley, you see these similarities with the upper Hudson Valley farmhouses. On the other side, the Dutch colonial style farmhouses in New Netherlands had a high variety of appearance. So they didn't build these settlers, these farmers, they didn't build only in brick, but they also built in brick and wood, built in brick and stone, all kind of combinations. Sometimes these farmhouses were covered by not step gables, especially, but like with pitch and parapet gables, or even later on with gambrel, roofs. And you can tell there is not one Dutch colonial style. So you can wonder what makes these Dutch colonial farmhouses Dutch, because you see on the big slide, you see all these different types of Dutch colonials. And you can tell if there should be like some people from Holland coming over to the States and they would just travel around and see these farmhouses. They wouldn't tell you immediately like, oh, I can picture this really as a Dutch colonial farmhouses, or we have them in Holland too, these kind of farmhouses. So that is why it's important just to mention or to find out like what are those specific Dutch features, because around the time that the Van Ostrander Radcliffe House was built in 1728, most owners of these buildings, they were already like second or third generation descendants of Dutch settlers. in fact, who had never been to the Old World. So, moreover, their ancestors, they came from a widespread area, northwestern Europe. So we said that they didn't only come from the Dutch Republic, the northern Low Countries, but they also came from the southern Low Countries, from adjacent areas in Western Germany, in northern France. So actually, they came directly to New Netherlands, or later like in New York, or they came indirectly through the Dutch Republic, and finally they moved to New Netherlands. So this means that like they didn't only bring their goods, but they also brought their cultural traditions, and these cultural traditions were like much wider, much broader than only like Dutch or from the Dutch Republic. That's why we actually should talk about like the Netherlandic building tradition. That would be even much better. To the left, the upper left corner, you see all these migration streams that you can say from European countries to the Dutch Republic, from the southern Netherlands, from like Norway, from Scotland. First, this is just a time frame like around 1680, and finally, also many of them just moved across the ocean to the New World. To the upper right corner, you see like the Low Countries during like the 80 Years' War, especially like when the 17 united provinces were all together, like which is nowadays about like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, northern France, and some parts of Western Germany. One specific and distinctive architectural feature of the Dutch colonial architecture in New Netherlands is like the Dutch H-band framing system. Like you can tell, this is typically from like the Low Countries and the adjacent regions, this way of construction. And over time, regional differences in the farmhouse building in New Netherlands increased, but the framing remained unmistakably like Dutch because of this framing system, and it was always traceable back to the prototypes in the Low Countries. This framing system, H-band system, it's actually those are two principal posts and connected by a girder. It's a girder or a tie beam in between of these posts, and also several feet from the top of these posts. And additional, there are braces, also called corbels, that were placed between the post and the girder just to prevent it from wrecking. In the living areas on the first floor, these planes, they were exposed, so they were not plastered, and so it was just part of the interior, a visible part of the interior. In the slide, you can see the 1675 Jan Martense Schenkhuis, which was demolished in the 50s and built up again in the Brooklyn Museum in the 1960s. And in the upper right corner, you can see the interior, how they built it up in the 1675 condition again. So talking about building materials, I showed you the same slide with the same kind of farmhouses, but just to just picture what kind of building materials were used in the New Netherlands region. As you can see, they're all different kind of materials. The upper left corner, you see a wooden construction. It's a frame construction with wooden cladding. In the upper middle slide picture, you see the Jar house in Newport, which is a stone building construction with a wooden gable end and a very steep pitch roof. But like the bottom left corner, you see the Van Schaik mansion in Cohoes, and it's built up out of brick only. While the Lucas van Elen house, the right side in Kinderhoek, is a brick veneer house, which is like the brick is laid in the wooden framing. Another distinctive architectural feature of the Dutch colonial houses is the jambalus fireplace. Here you see the same drawing of the Jan Mathijs Schenkhuis, and you can in the middle you can see the jambalus fireplace. Just to make it a bit more clear, is like the Dutch settlers and also their descendants, they made use, especially in the beginning, of these jambalus fireplaces till about like the 1750s. They had no sides like the English ones, these fireplaces, and they were backed by a brick or another fireproof wall. The iron, the wall was sometimes protected by an iron cast, as you can see the bottom picture. And in general, these fireplaces were wide, quite wide, and they were especially also used for cooking, not for baking, but for cooking, and also to sit beside the fireplace, kind of cozy way of sitting all together in one living space. The jambalus fireplace, they had a smoke hood with mostly a cloth hanging on it, and this was to catch the smoke. As you can imagine, an open fireplace, it creates a lot of smoke, which is not too good for your health, as we know nowadays. But the Dutch, they were really into these jambalus fireplaces, and they had a hard time giving it up. So it took till about the mid 1700s till they started to place English-style jammed fireplaces in their houses.
Marinus, just a small interruption. I don't know how many slides do you have because of the time. So maybe,
is it a good comment? Let me see. I got 23. So how much do I have? 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's make 5 minutes, and then we have some time for some Q&A.
Yep, good.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, here's some interior features, typically for the Dutch, the bed boxes, which also in the Dutch farmhouses and the Dutch urban houses were very common to have. They were like in the living room, you had the jambalus fireplace, but you also had the places to sleep. So cooking, eating, sleeping, everything happened in this living area. And so here you can see that it's part of the furniture. And at the right side, you can see an example of a bed box in the Adriaanse Koemanhouse in Koeman's with curtains, not with wooden doors. And also, the enclosed staircase was a typical Dutch feature of the interior. And they enclosed the staircase because the first floor was the only floor that was used for living, and the second floor, the garret, that was only for storage. So just to prevent the heat going up, so loose heat they had the stairways enclosed. Other features that are characteristic for the Dutch houses, urban houses, but also farmhouses, are the loft doors and the iron cranes. As the second floor was meant to be for storage of goods and the harvest. They had like loft doors, and sometimes they had like the iron cranes just to lift up all these goods. Or sometimes they just used a ladder, like in case of the farmhouse in the upper left corner. So sometimes they're still on the walls to be seen, like the Van Schijk Mansion House at the bottom right corner, but most of them are gone. Specifically for Dutch colonial houses are the various types of roofs. Actually, like originally they had like the step gable roof, but the parapet gable roof, very steep roofs. But finally they added also eaves to these gable roofs, just to, especially in the south, the houses in the south didn't have very steep roofs because that wasn't necessary because of the weather conditions, but it was very practical to have these eaves to have the sun out of when to have some more shade in the house when the weather was getting in the summertime too hot. Dutch gambrel roofs, specifically. Like later on, the Dutch colonials were the most distinctive feature of the Dutch colonial homes were the gambrel roofs, but actually this is not really a Dutch invention. Seems to be that it was an English invention, and the Dutch also part of like using this invention also for churches and for farmhouses or urban houses. But finally, it's the Dutch, they used it quite a bit, as you can see still also in the New Jersey area. Okay, other specific features, the Dutch doors. They call it Dutch doors, but also in this case, Dutch doors can be found also in other parts of Europe, but still in Dutch colonial houses in the Netherlands, you'll find plenty, so quite a bunch of them. And as you can see also on the drawings and the engravings, you see them pictured also in the 1800s. Also, stoops and benches are part of it. As you can see of Dutch colonial houses, they like to sit outside quite a bit. The Dutch talk about life and puffing their pipes. So very characteristic, and still to be seen some of these benches in upstate New York, for example. Other features, tumbling, wall anchors can be seen still nowadays, but also on the old pictures, as you can see for the Lansing Pemberton House, which was demolished in the early 1890s. And weather vanes. At the Johannes Beekman House, you can see here some weather vanes of this drawing, but still some original ones are in the archives or in the museums, like these two weathercocks, weather vanes, pictured over here. At the end, at the time that there was a Dutch colonial revival, as of the early 1880s, most of the urban Dutch colonial houses got demolished or were already demolished, like the Widow Sturtevant House in 1880 in Albany, and some Dutch step gable houses in New York in mid 1800s. About you see, you got like the Flemish Renaissance style as part of the Dutch colonial revival style, but most well known are actually the suburban colonial style houses that were very popular in the 1920s, 1930s. So I come to the conclusions. Some of them, like Dutch colonial style, is a collection of various sub-styles, Dutch should be read actually as Netherlandic, as it was a broader area. So present-day Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and those adjacent areas. Secondly, there is like late 17th and early 18th century Dutch-style houses retain many Dutch features. Only as of the mid-1800s, there was a new trends were emerging, and you got an evolution also in the Dutch colonial style. And further, in the cities, Albany and New York City, all Dutch houses were demolished. But on the other hand, in the countryside, many survived. But sometimes they were modified beyond recognition. And I think the Van of Strand Radcliffe house is a good example of this Dutch colonial home.
Okay, Marinus, thank you for your interesting story. I think for a lot of us here in the Netherlands, very recognizable as well, the type of architecture that you're showing us, and the different details as we can see them around us here as well. I don't know if other people have questions. I have one myself as well, so maybe you can think about another question. You already showed in your conclusion that a lot of demolition was took place in the cities in particular, and that in the countryside more houses were remained. Maybe that has also to do, besides the dynamic of the urban context, of course, but also with the practice of reuse of materials, which you normally see on the countryside. We see that here in the Netherlands as well, this tradition of reuse of materials. That could be a factor, I'm not sure. And I was wondering if these remains of these Dutch farmhouses, if they are protected or well known by people in the Hudson Valley, like as examples of the Dutch colonial architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question, because for my research, I started to make an inventory of Dutch colonial houses. And of course, you need to have a good definition of what is a Dutch colonial house, as you have a whole evolution and different sub-styles. And you got like Anglo-American. So until what time frame will you just count? And I must say, like, what you all mostly you will see them in the presentations and then on the internet, the ones that are protected and well known. But when you just go do some field work, you will find plenty of them still, like Dutch colonial style farmhouses, or sometimes in the smaller villages. And people are not always aware of them, and they're not always protected. So it's important, actually, as you can also see in the Netherlands, like people are aware of it, but I don't think there is a total overview of all these Dutch colonial homes. And sometimes in newspapers you will read like, okay, some people are aware of it and still they get demolished. Yeah. So there should be a bit more attention to that, I think.
Interesting.
But I think to add to that is like we need to be aware also in the Netherlands about this heritage overseas, because there are not many people in Holland that are doing like research or do have really specific knowledge about the subject.
Yeah.
So that's why the exchange program is a good tool to reach that goal.
Yeah, that's why we invited you to share your knowledge, because you're one of the researchers on this topic. And maybe one more question, and maybe Cara can say something about it as well, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in the United States there's a big appreciation of of some European roots. If nowadays we see President Biden going back to Ireland, saying this is my home country. And showing his roots as Irish descent. And also you can see that I think people are proud of the Dutch roots, if they have them, or Italian or whatever, to show that their family roots go way back. So that this looks like to be a big thing in appreciation. But how is that with the remains of the either the Italian or the Irish, or in this example the Dutch history, which is of course quite important in this region of the States. Can you say something about the general appreciation of this history and the physical remains of it? Is
that more for me or Marinus?
Either one of you. Maybe,
I'll let Marinus start and then I'll add on. How's that?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I'll let Marinus start answering that question, then I can add on. How's that?
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
So your question was the appreciation of in the US?
Yeah. What of the if there's a general appreciation of this kind of heritage and these roots of these Dutch colonial farmhouses, but in relation to the proud of these European roots in family history. It's an example.
Yeah, because that's for sure. Like the Americans are very proud of their family history. Like my oldest brother is living in the States. My sister-in-law is she is like American, but like you got the Irish roots and the French Canadian roots. And also the owners of these Dutch colonials are very aware of, in general, of what they are owning, or they're proud of that part of the heritage. But to me, it seems to be that they're like near on islands, so like they know, they are aware of it, but just to have it more like connected, and that could be a bit better. One day I saw that there was one Dutch colonial, and it was on the list. And I went to the town hall, and I said, like, what's going on with the building? And they said, like, and it was just 3 blocks away. And I told them, like, I met a guy, and he said, like, it will get demolished. It's on the list, like, what is called, Cara, the monument list.
The National Register.
Heritage.
Yeah, there's the National Register of Historic Places is our kind of national listing.
Yeah, so the woman said, like, oh, wow, this is interesting what you tell me. But to me, there was good to do, but they were not really aware. They were not really paying attention to what was happening over there, just like a couple of 100 meters away from that office. So those ones that are on the list, I think those are pretty safe, but there's so much more, and they will disappear. And you can tell there are always some people, like in the Netherlands as well, that are aware of the history or from their family roots, and they will try to get it saved, but then it just only the lonely. So it will be a hard job to have it saved. I think it's a bit like that. Maybe Cara, can you just add something to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think here, I mean, you're absolutely right. Everyone is very proud of their roots. I mean, you talk to anyone for the first time and they'll happily tell you all the different countries their families are from. So it's more genealogy based, though, I find, and it's obviously their family and their ancestors, but it doesn't always translate into the architecture around them quite well. You mentioned that a lot of the farmhouses are listed. So they're listed on the National Register, but unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of protections that come with that. So we find these National Register listed buildings that still go vacant and sit there very deteriorated, and no one's taking care of them, but because you don't have to maintain your properties, even if they're listed. Local listing is kind of the protective layer. And here in the United States, there's a very strong, you're not going to tell me what to do with my property feeling. And so local listing is a challenge very often. We find that more often than not, when you bring it up, there's obviously a struggle. You have to encourage them and sell them on this idea that, well, no, you want your properties to be locally listed because it protects you and your neighbors. We do have a few neighborhoods here in Albany that they're very proud of their neighborhoods, and one of them has the lovely Dutch Revival firehouse that you showed, Marinus, that neighborhood there, Delaware Avenue. They're very proud of their architecture, their community. And so they want local listing for those protections. We fought for local listing for the Van Ostrand Radliff House since pretty much 1988, and it wasn't locally listed until 2007. So it took a very long time and a lot of encouraging, as the previous owner was very against listing, because same thing, they didn't want to be told what to do with their property. But as you said too, there are some people that really, they care, they're interested, and whether it's their heritage or just they're very interested in the heritage of the area, they do care. As soon as we put the image on the front of the building with what the building originally looked like, because right now it's kind of just a plywood box. Once we did that, we had people coming out of the woodwork. My grandfather was an Ostrander, or were the Radliffs, and everyone wanted to talk about how they were related to the family that built this house. But before that image went on and it looked a little scruffy, no one wanted to own up to the fact that they were related. So
yeah, actually, you need to have good ambassadors like these people that are proud. They need to be ambassadors. And I think there's a role in this type of participation and volunteers.
Yeah,
those are the people.
Interesting history. I think Cara, you already took off to take us a bit more deeper into this process of protection and taking care of this kind of heritage. Maybe it's good, and it's about time. I think you take off with your presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Marinus, as well, for your interesting story. I think it's a good startup.
Oh, great. Sorry for taking too much time.
No problem. I think we're all a very, how do you say? It was just a very interesting story. Absolutely.
You'll definitely have to come visit us again and we can share more.
Wow, it would be great.
I love seeing all your insights. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Historic Albany, who we are, for those of you who haven't been working with us for the last few years, like Mathijs and Maurits, who know who we are. And then I'll talk a little bit about the house and how we got involved with the Cultural Heritage Agency or the RCE, doing a whole bunch of workshops and learning more about our building from all of you in the Netherlands, which we did last year. So Historic Albany Foundation is sort of the city's historic preservation not-for-profit. We were founded in 1974 when 98 acres, about 3,000 homes, churches, schools, businesses were demolished to build the Empire State Plaza, which is kind of the large government center in the middle of our city. This image that you see here shows pretty much the entire area that was demolished, and I would say a tiny handful of these buildings. Obviously, the larger ones that you see kind of to your right are the ones that are still present, but most of them at this point were demolished for this large project. So when this happened, this was just phase one, and the residents of the remaining bit of neighborhood were obviously very upset about what had happened and did not want this large bypass to kind of cut through their neighborhood and our large Olmstedian park. And so they had kind of banded together and fought the municipality and formed Historic Albany Foundation to advocate for our neighborhoods. Obviously, they were very successful in saving the neighborhood, as the Center Square and Hudson Park neighborhood and our Washington Park are still very well preserved today. They managed to protect all of these homes through kind of urban homesteading, and Historic Albany Foundation played a huge role in really educating people on how do you fix these houses that were made vacant because of the urban renewal, and they needed repair. They weren't really livable. So how do you do that? How do you afford to do that either? Because it's obviously very expensive when you have a building that now no longer has windows and has a leaky roof. And how do you afford that or fix it yourself? So Historic Albany was really created to not only advocate for neighborhoods, but also do education and provide all kinds of technical services, connecting people with the resources, but the other people and expertise that they need to know. So this slide shows you a little bit very tossed together of all the different types of things that we do. Education is a huge, huge part of what we do, whether it's hands-on workshops with how do you repair your windows, but also that appreciation component that Marinus talked about. You know, you have to appreciate your community and you need those ambassadors. And so through a lot of walking tours and lectures and all sorts of different programs. We kind of promote our own historic neighborhoods to residents. We do have, yes, some tourists that come visit us, but most of the people who are going on our tours or participating in our programs are kind of locals that have this passion for their community and they want to know more. And, tell me about the architect that built these homes and the people who lived there. And so that's a lot of what we do. The other components that we've kind of been adding over the years. In 1978, we added our architectural parts warehouse, which is basically a salvage retail store. So it's become increasingly hard to find plaster medallions or keyhole escutcheons and glass doorknobs in the US. We have these big box stores now. I'm sure Home Depots are creeping your way, perhaps, unfortunately, where, you get very mass-produced hardware, windows, doors, but they don't fit older homes because nothing was a standard size and people want to keep the detail. So since 1978, we've been salvaging homes that unfortunately are being demolished and saving any house parts that we can, and then reselling them to the public, not so much to make money, but more just to pay the bills, keep the doors open, and then get these parts into the hands of the people who need them. So our parts warehouse is a huge part of what we do. And we have an all volunteer team that does these salvage operations, which are really actually very fun, but sad at the same time, because you hate to see these buildings come down, but it's amazing to see how they were put together. As you're deconstructing it, you can learn so much about them and you really develop an appreciation for the materials and the craftsmanship as you're taking it apart. The last thing that we've added was actually very new just last year. We opened a tool lending library, as there are so many single-use tools that people need to restore their homes. And we found that a huge kind of wall for people or block for people restoring their buildings is, how do you find the tools? Or why do I want to pay so much money for this one tool that I'm only going to use once? And then where do I store it? So we've started a tool lending library with all different kinds of tools. Like we have a kit you can rent for the week, which has everything you need to repair your historic wood windows. So it has everything to reglaze it, your glazing points and the paint scrapers and the palette knives that you need. And you can borrow the whole thing together for the weekend. If you decide to do more windows, you can renew it for next week because we have lots. So that's really become a huge part of what we do. And then our programming obviously will follow with that as well. We have hands-on workshops with how to use these tools that you're borrowing from us and how to do the repairs that you're trying to do yourself to save a little bit of money, but also you're doing it for you. It's that sense of satisfaction that I fixed that. I didn't have to pay someone or hire someone. I did that work. That doesn't look half bad. Which then brings us to the Van Ostrand Radliff House, which kind of didn't really fit any of those categories specifically. It wasn't listed as any one of those things, but this building is really the embodiment of everything that we do. We help homeowners all the time with how do you connect the dots with funding and permitting, and do you need an architect? And we're using all of those things with this house. So it's kind of the full embodiment of our mission. As Marinus already mentioned, so the house was built in 1728, and we've always considered it more of an urban style building, as we saw these front-facing gables very typically in Albany, Schenectady, and Manhattan. And again, as Marinus so aptly pointed out, they're pretty much all gone. There were really only a handful that survived into the 20th century, and the 21st has seen even fewer. Albany has 2 buildings left in what was in our entire Dutch developed city. And unfortunately, ours is kind of hidden under this plywood box that you see here. The building grew so much. Every 50 years, it had another facelift, and it had so many different uses. It started as a house and then became a shoemaker's shop, and then became a leather goods business. And they had some tanning that went on there. And then it became an underpant manufacturer. So as all these different uses came in, right, the building changed and grew some more. So what started as this small little Dutch style house is now this, well, not quite behemoth, but fairly sizable, almost industrial building. And every time they modified it, they kind of took everything off down to the Dutch bones of it, that H-bent framing where the jamless fireplace is, and they just added on. So the most intact part of this building at this point is actually its original structure. All of the H-vents are still there. The roof is still there. We call it a molded anchor beam here, but I know there's a better word for it in the Netherlands for the front tie beam or girder that has a shaped profile, and that's still hiding in there. You can see it, if you can see my mouse, in the middle of the front here. So we put this image on it so that people can see kind of what the building looked like under all the plywood. And we split it into two very specifically so that you can still see on the front here, right in the middle where that division is our molded anchor beam. And since the building is plywood, there's very little left of that front facade, but we have all of the pegs for where the framing for the door, the windows, all of the wall framing were there. So we have the pegs and the mortise, and some of the tenons still stick out in spots. So we were able to actually recreate this image of what the house looked like, all from the physical evidence left in this one piece of wood. And that's kind of been the story of the house's restoration, and how we're planning to restore it, is really the physical evidence left from this building. I jumped ahead of myself a bit. So here's another James Yates painting. He was this painter that loved to paint what Albany looked like around 1800, and he captured so many of these early Dutch structures that remained. But one thing we've noticed is he hasn't captured many that have quite the same look as Van Ostrand Radliff, but it's the same as Slingerland's house that Marinus showed, that kind of half wood clad, half brick, or in some cases stone house. So we're curious more about where they were built in the Netherlands. And that led us to talk more with the RCE. I'll jump ahead a little bit, up too far. But that let us talk to you guys a bit more about how do you treat these buildings, right? What do you do with them, and how are they treated there? Right now, ours is vacant. Here's an image of what our neighborhood used to look like. A very full, bustling, commercial mixed-use neighborhood. And as you can see here, by 1985, it was getting a little lonely. And now it's quite lonely as we stand all by ourselves in a sea of parking lots. When we acquired the building in 2013, we knew no one could really restore this building the way it needed to be restored. And we were on the fence about this quite a bit. How far do we go? Because the architectural technology, how this building was constructed, that's the key here, right? That's the story that this house can kind of best tell. We have so many amazing farmhouses and so many other buildings that are in, frankly, way more intact condition than this house is. That do we reconstruct it? Is it worth it? Or because inside this plywood box, you can really see the bones of the building, do we kind of just repair and kind of conserve the inside? But as we talked about this, everyone kept saying, well, why are you trying to save this, 19th century industrial building? We even had people from the State Historic Preservation Office kind of coming after us and arguing, well, obviously there's nothing left of the Dutch building, so it's really just not worth keeping to look that way. And so what if you go back to it being Dutch? You're just faking it anyway, and it's all guesswork. And here we don't like guesswork. You have to base it on fact, which I would absolutely agree with. So we brought them all in to the building and kind of showed them around and show them, okay, well, here are all of our H-vents, and here's all of our jamless fireplaces that are still there. We don't have the cloth and the molding around it, unfortunately, anymore. It looks a little rough, a little different than the inside of Van Allen House and some of the others. But the main bones of it are really still there. And our west wall still has all of its brick nogging and the wood cladding on the side. And so we showed them the roof and all of the timbers and where they had cut off the collar ties, and said, okay, so you can go from your 19th century roof, and when we break out our protractors, we push it back in, and oh, look, it looks just like that characteristic Dutch roof again. And they all kind of gave it a head scratch, and they're like, you're right. There's more Dutch here left than anything else. And yeah, that kind of makes sense. So we felt, okay, that yes, we've been validated. We should be restoring this so the exterior really appears Dutch from the street so the public can understand it. We know what we're looking at when we see it because we deal with I would say Dutch buildings all the time, but older structures. So we're familiar, but the public needs to appreciate and understand this, as there's pretty much nothing else left. So that was kind of our plan. And as we sat there in our silo talking about it, we felt, okay, we need to bring the public in, but we also need more expertise. And we work with the consulate quite a bit. And Sophie Van Doornmalen, who was our representative or whatnot, she worked at the New York office and said, well, have you talked to Jean-Paul Courtin at RCE? And they do all these programs and they really have the expertise that you need. And so in 2019, we'd started a whole bunch of emails back and forth with how do we bring in expertise from the Netherlands, where you're all very familiar with this type of architecture and you know how to maintain it and how you use these buildings. So that brought us to our workshop. And so we started planning in 2019, and then the world changed as we knew it, and it became something that was in person to something that was completely virtual. And we fleshed it out way more. When we had gone to Jean-Paul, our questions were more, okay, very hyper technical, how do you physically treat these buildings? What are the techniques and approaches to restoring timber framing? And how far do you take it? Do you encase them in a box so they kind of sit there and they're more of an artifact? Or do you still just use them as regular buildings and you repair it a little bit so you can continue using it? Which then led us to, okay, well, what's around it and how's the area around it being reused? And the reuse became a huge part of it, right? Because a building can't just sit there with no one using it, right? Historic sites are wonderful, and we have several amazing historic sites, also particularly ones that interpret our Dutch heritage. But they're all struggling financially, and people visit them once in fourth grade for a field trip, or maybe twice if they go to a 12th night party at Schuyler Mansion. But they don't interact with them all the time very much. But we do have one other Dutch building in Albany that people interact with every day. And there's hundreds of people that go in and out of this building every day. And I'd say probably 5 of them, maybe, no, they're in the other oldest building in the city, and the other Dutch building. It's now the Old English Pub, which is quite literally the opposite end of town, north on Broadway. And so we're like, okay, what's the happy medium here? Do we want it to be a bar, a pub, something that people are always going in? Is it retail? Is it a shoe store? Or is it, a historic house museum that everyone says, well, of course it's going to be a house museum. Why wouldn't it be? And our response was, no, please, not another house museum that can't pay its rent and keep the lights on. So what do we do? So as we talked to Jean-Paul, he brought so much more analysis to this, which we're pretty bad at here, to be honest. We like to come up with ideas, but we don't really analyze things and look at what's around it and how does it impact everything and look at it more holistically. So the RCE really brought this amazing approach to us, really, for kind of looking at site development, the area around it, and this much larger picture for before you start coming up with ideas, let's get some more information, to determine these things. So we looked at the site, which you can see here, and you can see our little house kind of in the middle. I think part of our neighbor might still be there before that was demolished a few years ago when the roof just collapsed in. But there's nothing but parking lots around us and a parking garage across the street. And this very large elevated highway that's actually some 40 to 50, in some places nearly 100 feet up in the air, and which of course bifurcates the entire city. But you can also see how close we are to the city government. You can see the Capitol peeking out kind of in the middle. This large Empire State Plaza Government Center is still here. The big white box slightly to the left. Over here is our big arena where we have hockey games and Billy Joel concerts and monster truck events and all kinds of crazy things. So there's a lot happening right around where we are, but nothing right next to us. So the city of Albany has been trying to acquire all of this land and wants to redevelop it. So we've always felt that, okay, well, whatever happens here has to be a part of all of this. So our first workshop with the RCE was fantastic, looking at, okay, what are all of the uses around it? What would benefit this potentially? But it was more historically how it was used and what's currently there. Then we started looking more at reusing it. And looking at, okay, well, depending on what it is or what's around it, what could be good reuse, but also what are the opportunities here as well, right? So we did our SWOT analysis with, okay, we have one of the oldest Dutch buildings. There needs to be some cultural bent to it, right? Because we don't want to miss that opportunity. So what do you do with it? And what are, and as we talked, it became obvious that this witness building kind of had to do it all a little bit. It had to have a cultural element. It had to have an educational element to it. But it had to have more than that. It had to have some other draw, something else that supported the neighborhood around it. And so Historic Albany at the same time independently had also been coming up with this idea that we were going to move into this building. Our current home is an old car dealership and it doesn't really meet our needs anymore. So where else do we go? And we're looking at this building and going, okay, yeah, that could work. We have a retail shop where we sell all of these house parts, and well, if there's lots of historic conversions going on downtown, and on the other side, if I go back to this real quick, just to the south of this main highway is actually the city's oldest residential neighborhood. Most of the houses in this neighborhood were built around 1790 to really 1812, 1815. So it brought us closer to some of our historic neighborhoods where a lot of rehabilitation work was happening, but it also brings us to the most impoverished neighborhood in the city that really needed our help with quality of life things. They need their houses fixed. They need their windows repaired so that they don't have the cold coming in the winter because their kids are freezing in their bedrooms because the windows don't close. So moving here actually brings us physically closer to neighborhoods that actually need our services way, way more. So the more we talked about it, the more we kind of came up with this idea. And I think a lot of it was validated by the workshop, but also it made us think more critically about where each part was going to go and accessibility and how it worked with the community. And it was really amazing how it helped us look at it differently. Yes, Americans look at it differently, but also we're so used to looking at it Historic Albany that fresh eyes were just fantastic. And just a different outlook and approach to things was just absolutely amazing. Hearing about some of the development work that happens in the Netherlands and how different things are tried first and then the projects evolve based on this rather than, the idea first was just revolutionary to us. And we really enjoyed gaining a lot of that information. The last week focused more on restoration techniques. And I think we found that a lot of the approaches were actually not dreadfully different. It came down to usage was the big thing. We had to laugh. One person was talking about dating buildings, and they had found the oldest building in Amsterdam. And we were like, oh, so do people visit it on tours? And he goes, no, it's still a house. To us, everyone's like, oh, well, those are things that become more public spaces here. And so those were the approaches that were different, but not necessarily how we repaired buildings, that some of the actual techniques and things kind of stayed the same, which to us was really interesting, but also helpful quite a bit. So that's like the Cliff Notes version of all of this. What questions, I find things are better when they're more of a dialogue. So what questions to all of you have about this crazy project and all these things?
Yeah, Cara, thank you for your interesting presentation and invitation to the people who are here with us to share their thoughts as well. So maybe any one of you have an experience or a question to Cara to share. Please just speak out. Yep,
Marinus, you have a question? Oh, but you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I was still on mute. Now it's better, I guess. Yeah. I'm just wondering, how did you decide to get back to the 1728 construction? Because I can imagine not all the details are sure. And were there any alternatives?
Yes, we looked at several.
Get back to another date. Sorry.
No, I cut you off. There were several different thoughts on it. One of them was there's a photograph, which I think I had actually pulled out at the last minute. There's an early photo from about 1840. that shows the building as a leather goods shop for Jared Holt. And it looked fairly different from this. The roof line had already been altered, and it was a full 2-story building. And it had a storefront, and the building was as wide as it currently is. You can see here the house was much narrower. This is the current width from end to end. And so we had looked at it, and the more we looked at the old photographs that we had, almost nothing was left from the front. And none of the old photos we had were really high quality enough that we could get, molding profiles or significant enough details. But we have all of this physical evidence in the building. So the front image here was determined from that one piece of wood in the front. But we also keep finding items. We were in there for a tour, getting ready, and there were all these boards. And so we were moving them off the floor, and we found this door on the floor with the hardware still on it, and measured it all out and said, okay, yeah, that had to have gone physically there. And another time we were talking with, some engineers when the demo was happening next door, talking about how the houses would have been flashed together and there would have been a gutter. And then the gutter just fell down in front of us as a carved out log. So we kind of decided to go this route, mostly based on the physical evidence that was left in the building, because there's more physical evidence of this design inside and out than any other time period. So we'd actually be fabricating and recreating less by going back to this period than we would any later period, because the whole facade quite literally is a plywood box. In the 1950s, they had taken the beautiful storefronts that had projected, and they ripped them all out and just put in huge glass windows and then put permastone. I hope you don't have permastone in the Netherlands. It's one of the worst materials ever. It's cementitious stone that gets sculpted on the front of the building, and it just destroys everything it touches. So they put this all over the front, and then the upper stories, you can actually see a smidgen of it sticking out. It's asphalt shingle that's meant to look like brick. And so they just kind of wrapped it around bits of framing. And so the removals on this were just crazy. So we felt, okay, if we're going to go back to something, we have to have a good reason. We had to have evidence, whether it was photographic, architectural drawings, something, and most of it was physical evidence. The other kind of driving factor to this was that it is one of 2 Dutch buildings left in the entire city. And there's a small handful, there might be 7 of this type of building, these front-facing gable buildings in Schenectady. And most of them are not stone, they're brick. So this is kind of the only example of really timber-framed architecture like this that was used in an urban setting, with the side jamless fireplaces left potentially in the country. So we felt that to kind of just ignore that was kind of a lost opportunity. And we could interpret it through things like this image here. But again, it's just a sign on a cardboard box that needed other work, right? The building needed attention to continue standing. So we felt that the public had to easily understand this. So while we could do something that was more modern and just interpret this, we felt we really had an opportunity to use the knowledge and the evidence we had to do something that they could very easily understand as, oh, that looks wildly different from any other old building in the city. And then obviously we were supporting that with why that's a Dutch building.
Yeah, interesting, Cara. And to add something, it was this, once this decision is made to as you just explained quite clearly, to go back to the situation of 1728 or early 18th century, this decision. How does that work with the contemporary use that you're trying to put in? You already mentioned accessibility, but as well as keeping it on the right temperature, as you're going to use it as an office for educational use. Maybe daylight can be an issue. How do you go with that process if any additions are wished to the building, to use it on the way we use buildings right nowadays? Is
Absolutely.
that possible, or how is that?
It absolutely is. So we're very lucky that we actually have all these big additions that were already put on the building. And we decided very early on that, yes, while we're going to take the house back, we weren't going to demolish any of the additions, as frankly, the house is pretty small. And like you said, daylight accessibility, whatnot, even things like heating, where are you going to put the heating system, right? Or the restrooms. And we didn't want to clutter the house with all of these, newfangled things like bathrooms that would not have been there. So as we are kind of revealing the house again, we're going to be creating handicapped accessible entrance here into the addition. So this was actually an exterior space. When the house was put on, there was a carriage pass through here to get your wagon, whatever, from the street back to the shop. So we felt that using that as a means to enter the back part of the building was actually kind of an elegant solution. So there will actually be a handicapped wheelchair, whatnot, accessible entrance here. And then at the back, this photo hides it. But there's a grade level door that will be on the back. And there's actually 3, one on each side of this kind of low addition here. And we'll be using that for our parts warehouse. So you can get larger items in, but also if someone needs more space, turning radius, they can also enter through the building that way. We're also putting an elevator in the building so that every floor will be accessible. And that's going to be going in this big addition here. And again, as little intervention and changes to the building as possible, there was a dreadful roof leak, which compromised all of the floors kind of in this column here. So there's already a gaping hole in the floor on every level. I think you can see it. Nope. We very strategically photographed this. The camera woman in this case is standing next to a huge hole in the floor right here, so you don't see it. So we're putting the restrooms, the staircase, and the elevator in this larger addition. All of the heating, cooling, everything will be in the basement of the big addition, so that we're not changing this or cluttering it up with anything. So these additions actually gave us way more opportunity to make them accessible and add heating and cooling. From a daylight standpoint, the back wall also is full of windows. I don't know if you can see it here. You got to look really close. Each floor has 4 almost floor to ceiling windows. The double hungs are gone at this point, but we have a photo that shows them from like the 70s. So the huge addition is totally very well daylit. And especially this time of year, it's very bright till about 9:30 at night. So the back wall of the house, we're actually not putting a wooden wall here. We're actually going to be leaving it open and having any partition that closes this space off will be glazed so that we still get the daylight in, but you can use it as a separate space. So the first floor of the house here, we wanted to be the most accessible to people. So you'll be able to attend workshops, lectures. It'll be open anytime something is happening in the building. The office is open, the warehouse is open. You can walk in, check it out, and you'll be able to actually access it from multiple points so that anyone can access it at kind of any time. We are also adding a small window here to add a little bit more light.
Yeah, interesting. So in that way, the later additions and this layered history is of use as well, to in that way protect the original structure. In fact, so it all works together in that manner. It's quite interesting the discussion, I guess. Because of the time, because we're running out of time quite badly, which is no problem because it's all interesting. But we have Mathijs as well with us, Mathijs Witte from the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency. And Mathijs was involved with the expert meeting between the Historic Albany Foundation and the RCE in the Netherlands, and also visited Albany. Maybe, Mathijs, can you share your presentation, which you're already doing, and introduce us more to this topic of the urban heritage conservation, and how do you do that with with threatened heritage, which is in this urban dynamic situation, this context, and how do you deal with that, and what if all these forces around it don't all point to protection and conservation? How do you deal with that the dynamic. Please,
Well,
Mathijs, share your story.
Get some. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, we have image and
Got some big shoes to fill. Thank you, Cara, for such an inspiring presentation. You show what's it about in America, being knowledgeable, being very communicative, being very optimistic, and also loving this building, which you try to save. And that's what I found all over the Albany and in the rest of New York. So I want to reflect on my experience when I was there, and also in the experience of all the participants who joined the workshop in the past year. So who am I? I'm as Maurits already mentioned, I'm an architectural advisor for the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency for the provinces of Gelderland and Overijssel. And I organized and took part in Albany near Bos Exchange, and in November 2022 I went to Albany, New York. And personally, I have a very huge interest in Dutch history and building history and the Dutch legacy in the USA. So since a young age, I will just tell you a little bit about the Heritage Cooperation Program we have of the RCE. Then I will talk a little bit about the exchange itself with the questions we had. I will go to the 2 case studies we studied, and then I will end with a reflection on what I think is what are the in America and in the Dutch context, which are the 2 the differences and now sorry, I forgot the words. So let's go to the International Heritage Cooperation Program. It's a very interesting program, which is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Dutch Ministry of Culture and Education and Science. And it shows that the Dutch try to engage in processes of heritage preservation in a few of the countries we have been active historically, but also trying to engage with questions that are related to heritage and urban conservation in many other countries around the world, and try to share our experience and our knowledge with the knowledge and experience that local people have in their own cities, towns, and areas where heritage is under threat. This online meeting, I didn't do it alone. I did it with Cara, with Julia, with Jean-Paul, and with Esther. And we did it in 3 parts, as Cara already mentioned. And at first we wanted to meet each other in person, but since Corona, of course, it wasn't possible anymore. And we decided to have the workshops online. And it gave some advantage because we could really dive into the matter and into the subject, and we could organize 3 different workshops in different different times of the year, in February, June, and October 2022. And we tried to compare both case studies, the Van Olsson Redliff House and Kinderdorp near Bos. And we tried to distinguish their similarities and differences. And we had 3 meetings where heritage professionals from both sides of the ocean reflected on different issues concerning the difficulties of the preservation and conservation of the 2 studies. So we already got introduced to the Van Olsson Redliff House. And I wanted to show you the other case study, which is the Kinderdorp near Bos in Nijmegen. It's an orphanage, a Protestant orphanage founded by a preacher, Johannes van Lindenhout. And at one time in 1893, it was the biggest orphanage in the Netherlands for young people, and housing about 1,000 orphans. In the 60s, it became a youth care facility, and in 2001 it stopped working. And it's in the church you see above, you have the youth care museum now, but still the site it's very big with a lot of houses. Actually, the church was also built by the orphans themselves with help of some timber people and some other people from Nijmegen nearby. And well, the chapel is still there, but the rest has been changed in the 60s because there was a new idea of how to house and how to educate youth in the Netherlands, or orphaned youth, and also youth with problems. So you see down, you see a 10-sided pavilion, which was the first buildings erected after 1963, and it housed about 18 children, and they all had their own room, and then also a mother and a father, or the group leaders, were living in this house. So you could they all lived together as a family, and they did things together, but the children could also go and sit in their own rooms. And before, they had to sit in or sleep in big bunk beds with 10 other people, so they didn't have any privacy. So you see the development of the whole youth care in the Netherlands in this site. And the problem is that Nijmegen is very economically viable, and it's very much a problem. All around it, there's industry, there's new high-rise coming. So this therapeutic landscape, as we call it, this landscape which was for the youth care and for youth institutions and for schools and for youth that needed help, is slowly disappearing, and it's really under threat, just like the Van Osteren and Redcliffe House. So our questions were very similar to both case studies, so we could compare them really well, and we saw that both sites have a lot of problems that are both threatened by big city developments, and so both places have to look for a new future and how they can survive in this big development on sites. And the question was also like, how can heritage be embedded in the new plans for both of the sites, and how can we have a right to exist in this new in the new future of the area. And both Historic Albany Foundation and Van Lindenhout have done a great job, I think, in the past year to think about these ideas of how to get heritage, how to get a new future for both of the sites and both of the buildings, actually, and a way to secure their future as well. So we had adaptive reuse as a second workshop, and from both sides, professionals could talk about it. And because both buildings have been empty so long and without a use, and now this 10-sided pavilion is also a little bit outdated. It's from the 60s. You cannot find easily a new function for it, just like the Van Osteren and the Redcliffe House. What do you do with it, and why should you keep it, and how should you keep it? And well, we talked about it a lot, actually. And what the Americans showed us actually was that you find a solution so close by to your own. We tend to look to the government sometimes, and that they have to find a solution for this before it gets demolished. But well, there are so much energy, so much functions, and so many other users nearby that can use these buildings, and maybe so try to get in contact with all those people around you and see if somebody's interested in using this building. So that's what we shared with our American counterparts, and what the museum is actually now doing with on site. So they're really organizing their so also like the museum. There's this museum, but it's always closed. So they have a new program of getting involved in local communities more and go out of the area and show what they have and get people to come to them instead of that they have something to offer. And so that's what we learned from the Americans actually. So actually the museum is now thinking about buying one or two of these pavilions, and otherwise they would have been demolished. So the third workshop was restoration. And well, that was interesting. Cara told already a lot about it, about the things that came up. How to restore was not the real question, but to which period do you restore it to? And if it's Dutch, why is it Dutch and how Dutch is it? So that was what Marinus also told us. So there's some, and it's so interesting to see that we had this question also raised with the Kinderdorp near Boston, where our American colleagues really told, well, is it bad if it would be demolished, or what's keep one, or what should you keep from this period from the building? Is it stand-side pavilions? Is it the grid where it's in, or can you demolish some of them? And should you use it for in the near future? This was a very valuable insight into how you can how you restore. Is it in the materials, or is it more in the shape? You can make something new out of it. Sorry, I have to go back. You can make something new, or you can make a new building. If this old stand-side pavilion is if it's not able to restore it anymore, so you can also choose to rebuild it in the same volume or in the same shape. It's not necessary to keep the building as it is, maybe, but that was a very good insight, I think. So the conclusion, that is actually, I was thinking about it for a long time, that the heritage practices in both countries don't differ so much. I've seen a lot of effort being put into listing old buildings in both countries for the national, regional, and local registers. It's not easy. In the Netherlands, it's not easy to be a Rijksmonument these days, or to get onto the monument list. Also locally, it's not very not much people are waiting for it to be on this list. So but in America too, it's hard. You have to get people. You have to be an ambassador. You have to come across and really talk to the people that it's so important to keep your monuments and to keep them alive and to keep them present in this time and to give a function to it. So we both have these difficulties in getting the buildings enlisted and getting make sure it's not demolished. And cultural heritage is in both countries. I saw a very important part of and an integral part of new area plans. So, I mean, the Van Oosteren and Red Leaf House is being saved, and it was and it's so important to see that the local government is also trying to get the building more getting more space and getting really a good giving it good meaning, a good place in the new development of the area. And so in the Netherlands too, we have a lot of instruments, a lot of knowledge about how to work with the heritage and give heritage as a resource for change. It's like a stimulate. Heritage stimulates identity and new areas, and give it a new identity as well. So I saw a lot of adaptive reuse in old buildings, and that was, I mean, the Americans asked us, is it true that you have a lot of churches with trampolines in it, or with a skate park in it? They were really shocked that we had so many different uses for churches. They are not so far as we are. But it's very interesting to see that they're also thinking about how to reuse churches and other main buildings. So we're not so far from each other. We're the same, in the same alley. And in both countries, I met a lot of people who are very engaged in in extensive research in buildings and in the building structures, and giving advice and technical assistance to owners to maintain the building. So what is different then? I think there are two differences with the case in the heritage practice in the Netherlands. Is that the local government is very much engaged in the Netherlands in the way that it's active taking part in the protection of heritage through spatial planning. While in the US, the active role of the government is there too, but it's more about politics and about money and about it's also more top down, I think, and it's sometimes hard that the government listens to you. Maybe Cara can add, but it's very interesting to see that it's very the local government in the Netherlands is more aware, maybe sometimes of protecting heritage, or at least they're open to it, and I think the Americans too, but they're a little bit more less active than you would want if you're protecting in the business of heritage protection. And the other is the private initiative. It's so much more important in the States, I think, than in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of people active as well, but it's a whole other level. And I've been to some organizations in the north of the New York area, New York State, and they already have 4,000 or 5,000 members for a local heritage protection office in the Adirondacks. And the biggest Dutch heritage protection organization, the private one, has about 4,000 people. So you can compare that. It's only locally is already, and they're much more sometimes involved and active in trying to preserve the heritage locally. And I was very touched by how many different groups of heritage groups try to maintain their own heritage, like the Afro-American community, all the different legacies of the different colonists, the different countries they came from. It's so much interesting to see all these organizations trying to preserve their heritage actually locally. And it's so interesting to see that the Dutch heritage is also very much looked upon and very well established, and also very interesting to see in Albany and the surrounding area. So I think private initiative is very much. Also, we talked about to an owner that spent so much money on his house, of a house of Frank Lloyd Wright, and it was amazing to see how much he spent for this house and how much he wanted to be it perfect. And maybe in Netherlands we also do that, but we look to the government maybe a little bit more, and he just paid all from his own pockets. Well, I'm curious about how you think about it, and these are my observations. So I give you the floor back to you, Mathijs.
All right, thank you, Mathijs, for your presentation. I think it's very interesting to see this practice of restoration and reuse of this kind of heritage, which is in a threatened situation, and how does it work when you really try to work on it. And I think one of the conclusions is as well that listing monuments is not the end. It's not the ultimate goal. It's just a means to protect and to keep this value and this heritage for the future, as well as reuse is. And the example of the Van Osbrand Red Cliff shows that reuse is important as well, to maybe keep this kind of heritage well known, and to make connection with new public as well, to show the history. And reuse can follow reuse and reuse again. So I think we have very good examples of how you deal with this kind of heritage. And it's a very interesting story from the history of this Dutch colonial architecture in New Netherlands to the Albany Neerbos workshop. I think that was a good way to go through it. I saw that in the chat, some people already asked some questions, which is great. Because of the time, I won't all repeat them. And I see that Cara and I think, yeah, Cara, you already answered all the questions quite extensively, so that's all great. But still, if anybody has a question to Mathijs or to one of the other speakers, please speak out. And there is, of course, always room to share. Maybe anybody has a question. Good.
Maurits, I have a question to Cara.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do these voluntary groups do connect to each other, get in contact with each other in the States? Do you have any idea? Because as Mathijs mentioned, there are many voluntary groups.
There's several different ways. Some of them are more overarching groups. So in New York, we have a statewide historic preservation not-for-profit, and we all communicate with each other through this larger not-for-profit. We meet up annually for events and then kind of make connections with them. So we partner with some of our other organizations, just kind of learning about them, meeting them through this overarching larger group. We also have that on like at the city level for all of the historic sites, cultural venues and whatnot. That all goes through, I guess part of it's now the tourism arm, but the city had developed kind of a committee for this to kind of do exactly that, is make connections, really. And we found that now with social media, which I was not a huge proponent of at the beginning, we've actually been able to connect a lot more easily with like-minded groups that are further away. Like right now, we participate with a group of historic preservation professionals, but several people that we work with as well. You know, they have ones for people who do historic masonry or people of Dutch ancestry. So there's lots of ways to connect that we found actually through social media. And once those connections are made, we do programming together and we do field trips to each other's sites, and it makes those connections that we need to share information.
Yeah, thank you. And Mathijs, do you see how is the situation for your boss? Like the town is really involved, the city of Nijmegen or Heemschut, like one of the heritage groups?
Yeah, we were lucky that Heemschut was one of the organizations. That's the largest private organization in the Netherlands. That they were involved very early. They were called by the director of the museum, like to help them, to help her to see how she can safeguard these pavilions and the whole site actually. So, and then Heemschut started to talk with the local government and with the public, with the advisors, heritage policy advisors, and they picked up the story as well. And I think that was really well done by the local government. So now that we have saved 2 of the 5 pavilions, and maybe we can save more. I don't know what's or. And if it's necessary to rebuild some to develop there, we do it with a lot of care for what it was, what the history was of the site, and how to fit the new buildings in the older landscape. So yeah, we in 2 ways we have a good development here, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, thanks, Marinus, for your question and the answers of Cara and Mathijs. I think this ambassador, a role of ambassador and relation to the public is key for the future of these monuments as well. You can't do it without people who see the value and love the building. Just a law is not enough, and money is not always enough, or government is not always enough either. You really need the people to take care and to take action and time and initiative and knowledge into these buildings. to redevelop, to restore, to maintain for the future. And unfortunately, we saw in the presentation of Marinus that when there's a lack of appreciation, lots of this kind of buildings get demolished and get lost in time. Yeah, we saw that a lot. Well, due to the time, I don't know if there's any question. I don't think so. I would really explicitly like to thank the speakers, Marinus, Cara, and Mathijs. Really thank you for your time, your effort, and your presentation. I think we really have an interesting story tonight, and I'm glad that we can share this presentation online as well. And for all of those who are with us tonight, thank you for coming, for listening, and really hope to see you during our next ICOMOS lecture, which will be on the 10th of May. And if I'm right, it will be around post-earthquake recovery and how villages, cities, listed monuments, either listed or not, are in this context of this recovery after an earthquake. How do you deal with that? This lecture will be on site at the Dutch Culture Office again at the Herengracht in Amsterdam. So if you're able to join us, you are more than welcome. And for now, I wish you all a good night. Thanks again for the speakers. And yeah, I think that's it. Maybe anybody else wants to share